Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
All right, welcome back to the Cycling Demystified podcast. Today we've got me, Way, and
me, Matt. I had to think about that.
Yeah, we'll get there. And you might have heard Ev chuckling in the background, who's building
I'm the
wheels.
producer today. I'm the voice.
Producer.
Disembodied voice in the background.
Well, I had to give an alias to the police this morning.
Oh yeah, what happened this
I've
morning?
had to remember my own name. Some idiot on a line bike ran into the back of me again on a different bike.
Yeah, we're going to have some words about your riding.
What, my brakes work?
Yeah.
Seems to keep happening to you.
Seems to keep happening, doesn't it?
So,
Well, who sets my brakes up?
whoops.
Anyway, before we get into rant mode, today we're going to continue with our little mini-series on foot and shoe optimization. Today we're going to talk about Q factor and stance width of your feet and where they go relative to your pedals and cranks and so on. And hopefully this is something that a few listeners have been asking for, because we don't talk about it that much, it seems, in terms of bike fitting, although it's an important part of your overall setup and something that you should be considering and can have a pretty large impact on knee health, how your feet interact with the shoes, and overall comfort. Of course, everything, as you all know, if you've been listening to us, everything on the bike is affected by everything else. So you change one thing, it changes everything else. And so you just need to be knowledgeable about all the different parts of your bike fit if you're feeling a little bit of discomfort. So hopefully we can give you some hints, tips, hacks, tricks about how to adjust your stance width, where your feet go, essentially, in a lateral position, or lateral or medial, so side to side position, and what you should be looking for in terms of what you should be feeling through your feet or your body that might be directly affected by how far or the stance width of your feet. What you can do about it, and different situations where you might want to change your stance width. But before we get onto that, so what happened, Matt, this morning? Did someone just see your shiny new bike and thought, wow, that's a really nice crash?
No, I stopped for a zebra crossing. No one else bothers to do it.
Yeah, I've got it's a bit of a kind of my dog ate my homework kind of thing happening here.
Well, it was kind of a thing though. It's like I literally stopped in time to put my foot down before the impact happened, and it was just here we go again kind of thing.
The old Bill got involved.
What is it? Well, they just happened to be there, and the officer was so tell me what you saw. I was like, well, I didn't see much, to be fair, but I felt it. It was all happening behind me. But yeah, luckily no harm done to me anyway.
I don't know.
There was a bit of a nasty raspberry a few bikes back in the pile-up, but yeah, just another day commuting in London, isn't it, really? Check your brakes.
Check your brakes, folks.
What was interesting though, the lad who clattered into the back of me was riding a line bike, and obviously those things are power assisted, and he was going a fair old lick. No way he was stopping for this zebra crossing. I had a little go on his brakes, felt like melted Mars bars. And yeah, it was just like, well, you're clearly going faster than your skill level is able to cope with. So
He obviously doesn't follow Sir Peter Sagan. Should have just bunny hopped you.
bunny hop me,
Yeah.
exactly.
There you go. And
But anyway, enough about my commuting woes.
so if you're commuting out in London, folks, look out for Matt. Try not to crash into the back of it.
Yeah, just give me a wide berth. I don't like riding with other people for a reason.
Right.
Anyway.
All right, let's get into some
wanna talk
bike
about
fit
Q
stuff.
factor?
Yeah, Ev's not here, so he's just in the background. So we can talk about bike fit geekery.
Let's do it.
All that stuff. So I think the first thing we should define is a difference between Q factor and stance width, though, because they are two different things, but they are very much interrelated. And I guess Q factor gets bandied around quite a bit. So I think we should start by defining those two things. So yeah, you want to give us a go on Q factor?
So Q factor is essentially the width between the outer edges of your cranks. And that is what what we determine as Q factor. And then your stance width is the center of your pedals. So i.e. where your feet go and how far apart they are relative to the bike, essentially. The two are very interrelated, like you say, and can affect each other both positively and negatively. So you can't have one without the other, but you can have more of an influence on one relative to the other. So there's Q factor and effective Q factor, which influences your stance width. That's how I tend to think of it. You with me?
Yeah, still here.
Yeah. And when I say you with me, I'm checking my coherence, not your understanding.
So yeah, and just as a quick example, so mountain bikes and road bikes have different Q factors. So mountain bikes have a wider Q factor. So if you look at if you try and fit a mountain bike crank onto your road bike, it just won't fit. The axle will be too long. And so the idea behind that is, they're two different disciplines, and so you might want a wider foot stance for your mountain bike, and so they achieve that by putting a wider Q factor crank on the bike.
The other thing to say with that as well is that the extra width of the axle accommodates things like wider tyres.
Yes, as well.
So that's something to, especially if you're looking at gravel bikes or road bikes with wider tyre clearance, that's something to think about as well. But we'll get onto that maybe later.
Yeah, we've recently been kind of retrofitting lots of gravel bikes with different cranksets and having to explain kind of the difference between a gravel crankset and a road bike crankset. And then the mountain bike crankset, so gravel sits somewhere in between a mountain and a road bike. So we should get onto. I know it's probably out of our remit of like talking about cross compatibilities between mountain and road and all the rest of it and gravel. But maybe for another podcast. But let's stick with Q factor and stance width. So why do we care about stance width? So basically, how wide we should put our feet on the pedals.
In 2 words, stability and comfort.
There we go.
That's why we care.
Yeah, and I guess it's just logical thinking, really. If you stand with your feet slightly wider apart, then you're going to have a slightly wider base of support, so you're going to have a more stable platform. Did you say? Potentially. But cycling, as we know, is not, standing. We're in motion, we're dynamic. And so stance, where our feet are kind of placed, also has a relationship to our hips and the rest of our body. So I think, like in many ways, like our bodies can almost get away with a little bit more variation in kind of stance width, but there's not that much. I don't know. There's compared with like say crank length or like stem length or seat height and all the other adjustments on the bike. There's not a huge variety in kind of Q factor. Stance width kind of choices, I'd say.
No. So if you look at 2 extremes of take road bike sizing, you have take a popular bike like the Canyon Enduro Race, goes down to a 3XS and a double XL, believe, and covers about 7 sizes, all of which has the same Q factor, which is wild to me. Because like you say, stance width, Q factor, they're interrelated, but it can have a massive effect on hip health, knee health, stability on the bike, the way you can transfer force, all of this kind of stuff. So it does matter.
Yeah.
And there are lots of ways in which you can affect it and kind of play with it to make sure that you are giving yourself movement options
Yeah.
in terms of your hip internal, external rotation.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably jumping the gun here a little bit, but essentially your foot and your hip are kind of those two extreme points where you contact the bike and your knee is caught between that.
Mm-hmm.
And stance width can have a massive effect on what happens between those two contact points of the saddle and the foot. So making sure that that is in a good place relative to your anatomy, like in terms of, you know, the width of your hip, the amount of internal, external rotation you have of your kind of, you know, your femur and your kind of like where the kind of the ball and the socket joint and contact in the hip can, it can unlock a lot of things on the bike in terms of power and comfort.
Yeah. I think if we think about it as, let's imagine we're looking at a biomechanically perfect kind of system where when we're pedaling and we're pushing down on the pedals, our hip, knee and foot are kind of perfectly in line with each other in a vertical plane.
Which never happens.
Which
but
never
for the sake of this
happens.
argument, all human movement is, well, most human movement is rotary. So
But
for the
if
sake of argument,
like, just in a simplistic view, imagine our leg is just like a piston and we're pushing down on the pedals, and you want those 3 points of that piston or system, like your hips, hip joint, your knee, and your foot, all to be aligned so that you can push straight vertically down on the pedals to generate effective force. Now, if you, for example, had a wider foot stance, but you kept the hip and the knee in the same plane, then as you push down on the pedal, on the pedal stroke, because you've got a wider foot stance, you'd be pushing slightly outward during that kind of downstroke of the pedal foot. And so your force through the pedal is not directly kind of straight down, but slightly outward at an angle. And so, you know, that changes the interaction of the knee and the hip and where the forces go through the knee and the hip. And so that may kind of affect what your knee feels or your hip feels or your ankle feels and so on.
Or how you load your foot.
Or how you load your foot. So, quite often if, let's give some examples of things that people feel.
So first thing would be, where do you feel the force going through your foot?
Yeah.
We start at the ground up. Where, like, do you feel it more in the inside of your foot, the medial aspect? Like, so if you're loading your first met head and your big toe a lot and you can't feel your lateral foot, so your outside of your foot, your pinky toe, then that could be a sign that your stance width is maybe not quite where it needs to be. Likewise, if you're feeling the opposite, if you can't load your first met head and you're feeling all the pressure on the lateral aspect of your foot, that could be, you could be, in the wrong place in the opposite direction. So first thing would be to think about, as you're pedaling, where do you feel the force being applied through your foot as you press on the pedal? Is it central? Is it more towards the inside? Is it more towards the outside? And does it feel different on the left versus the right, or the right versus the left? If so, that's interesting to have a look at. But just making these kind of initial observations can give you a good idea from which you can work upwards and see what's going on from there.
And I think the same applies for kind of knees and hips. So, if you're pedaling, do you feel kind of more tension or force through the outside aspect of your knee, lateral, or the inside of your knee, or is it in the middle? And which muscles in your leg are also working, like your quad. If you look at your quad, then the medial aspect of your quad is usually quite big. Do you feel more work going through there, or is it the outside kind of aspect of your quad? And hip as well, like do you feel like you're having to push through the outside of your hip or rotate your hip outwards or inwards. Where does your knee go in terms of like tracking? If you just look down at your knees whilst you're pedaling, like quite often we'll see kind of knees kind of rolling in towards the top tube, and even in more extreme cases, like kind of knees and thighs brushing against the top tube. And that might be a sign that, something needs to be improved. Like we generally want a kind of more aligned, I don't know,
I'd say stacked.
Yeah, we kind of want the knee to remain kind of in a neutral position through the pedal stroke. Like it's not rolling side to side too much whilst you're pedaling. And usually that's kind of helped by having a hip and foot kind of aligned with the knee in the middle. And so, you get this kind of stacking of hip, knee and foot on top of each other. Well, that's very basic because there's so many variations within the human body and kind of how it moves. But if we work from like this kind of idealistic kind of view and work outwards, then that will kind of give us a better view of like kind of where we're kind of shooting towards. Firstly, we need to diagnose. We need to make observations in our bike fit, so that is it worth exploring in terms of kind of stance width. And usually also we'd kind of explore stance width in our bike fit after we've got quite a lot of the other kind of aspects of our fit kind of dialed in and out the way, including seat height and saddle position, handlebar, cockpit position, and general fore-aft of like cleat positioning. So once we've got all those kind of out the way, it seems like a more appropriate time to be looking at kind of your stance width usually.
Rotation, cleat rotation as well. That's usually another good giveaway.
Yeah.
As to maybe if you want to play with your stance width. So if you're bashing the chainstay with your heel or the crank with your heel, that could be a sign that you want to play with stance width.
Yeah, that kind of classic kind of rubbing away of the paint on the halfway up your crank, maybe a sign that your heel is just rubbing against the crank, and so that might be a sign that you could be giving a little bit more room. So if you want to play with your kind of stance width, how can we do that? There's lots of different ways.
The most obvious and easy to do without any extra paraphernalia, if you like, would be most cleat systems, they have adjustment in the fore-aft plane,
front and back,
rotation, so heel in, heel out. And also medial lateral, so you'll be able to move them side to side. So the first thing to play with would be the side to side or medial lateral movement of the cleat. Now some cleat systems have more movement than others, but most of them, or nearly all of them, will have some range of adjustment in this plane.
But it's fairly small still, so like most cleats you'll only be able to adjust maybe 3 to 5 mil.
Speed play you do more.
Mountain
bike, SPD, you can do a bit more. But if you're on Look or Shimano, it's going to be 3 to 5 mil tops, basically.
But it can still have, people will feel that kind of difference. So it's worth kind of playing around with. But as with all bike fitting, any adjustment is just an experiment. So first of all, you just need to make sure you know where your current position is before you make any adjustments, and we'd usually recommend just drawing around your cleat position. If you've got like road shoes and you've got Shimano Look pedals, then just draw around it with a marker pen or something
take photos
or do something that you can replicate your current position, then move it and make sure that you can return to the original position. And same with mountain bike cleats are a little bit easier because they make indentations into the shoe when you tighten them up, because they've got little teeth that kind of bite into the sole of the shoe. So that can be useful in there. But yeah, just take some photos, do something.
Yeah. The key thing is do something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you will be the proverbial spaniel chasing their tail, trying to put it back.
I think we can't iterate this kind of like more. It's like whenever you're playing with your bike fit, it's you need to record your position in some way so that you can return to the position as and when you need it. Everything is an experiment, and if you want to be scientific and systematic about testing different aspects of your bike fit, then you basically need to be able to compare different positions. And if you don't know where you started from, then you're dead in the water already. So make sure you record your starting position and then make adjustments from there and go back to your starting position. So where did we get to? Yeah, so lateral adjustment is most easily made through cleat adjustment, so just moving cleats back and forwards.
But it's counterintuitive.
How so?
So depending on which way you want to go with your feet, so if you want to move your feet away from the bike, so to increase your stance width, go wider, you would push the cleat towards the medial aspect, the inside of the shoe. So it's the opposite. The cleat goes in the opposite direction to where you want to move your feet to. And the same is true if you want to bring your feet closer to the bike. You would push the cleat towards the outside, the lateral aspect of the shoe, to bring your feet towards the frame. So it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think once people start playing with it, it should become obvious.
Yeah.
But it's always confusing when you're looking at the underside of your foot, because basically everything gets turned upside down. Yeah. So just bear that in mind. Just think about it and play with it and see what happens. But so cleat adjustments probably the easiest thing to do. I'd probably say different pedals, probably the next easiest.
Yeah, so different pedals, spacers, axles, washers, all that jazz.
So different pedal systems will offer, or different brands will offer pedals with different length axles. So Shimano offer like a standard kind of pedal with standard axles, and then they offer like a narrow fit. Is it a narrow fit?
Wide,
or
plus
wide fit?
plus 4 mil.
Yeah,
so that'll give you. So their standard pedal is 52 mil axle, and then they do in Ultegra and Dura Arce. They do a plus 4 mil. Yeah. So increasing the length of the axle by 4 mil on each side. So 8 mil. Yeah. Total.
So if you need more than what your cleat position offers, then you can go out. Yeah. Or maybe you're on kind of the wide ones already and you want to come in, then you can get
the narrower ones,
different axles. Speedplay used to be the kind of bike fitters' pedal of choice, or pedal of choice for bike fitters, because they used to offer the greatest amount of both axle lengths. We used to have a box with like, I don't know, it's like
so many,
8 different axles.
Yeah, so many.
Like that. But also they used to make extender plates so that you can move your cleats further back, further forward. Yeah. They have the greatest amount of lateral adjustment in the cleat position itself, and also float adjustment. So float is different again. So float doesn't come into stance width, but it allows more rotation of the foot once clipped in. So yeah, Speedplay used to be really amazing in terms of adjustment. But
and Wahoo ruined it.
Yeah, well, Speedplay just went out of business, didn't they? So sold to Wahoo, but Wahoo
I'm not bitter.
Yeah. They haven't got the same. They do offer still 4 different pedal axle lengths.
Up to 65 mil long. So I think the standard is 52.
Yeah.
They do a 56, 59, and then a 65, I believe.
So still pretty wide. But yeah, until they sort out their kind of bearings,
Yeah.
I think we're not going to be.
We're not there yet.
We're not there
If
yet.
you can find some OG speed players,
Yeah.
you're winning.
But other brands still do different Q factors. So pedal axle lengths. So SQ Lab
Yeah.
make a mountain bike and road systems with different length axles. Who else makes them? There's a few brands out there that make different axle lengths.
Yeah, Crank Brothers, I think.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe,
Can't remember.
off the top of my head.
Yeah. And there's some other interesting kind of cleat systems out there, like time cleats. If you install them on one shoe, one way round, then you would have a narrower or wider stance, and then if you swap the cleats over to
get
the
a
other
wider
shoe,
one.
then you get like a wider stance.
Yeah.
So there's like different companies have different ways of achieving more medial or lateral stance. Actually, I think even time pedals have like side to side movement built in.
They have, yeah,
To
so they have
their
like a
cleats.
dynamic Q factor, I think. Is that what they call it?
Yeah. So I haven't ridden time pedals for a long time.
Siri did that.
But I'm not sure how useful that dynamic kind of system is. But it would be interesting to experiment. And
Yeah,
see what
maybe we should get a
happens.
pair.
Yeah.
But the other thing that you can do with your pedals is obviously buy extenders. So you can, if you don't want to buy new pedals to
Yeah.
get the different axle width, you can buy little bits of aluminium, steel, whatever it is, titanium
Yeah.
if you're posh, that will extend the effective length of the axle for you.
Yeah. So
But the
almost
problem with these is that they tend to only be quite extreme in their width.
Yeah.
So like 20 mil is usually the starting point.
Yeah, like you can get some which are like 2 mil, and then they seem to shoot up to 20 mil.
I mean, that's basically a pedal washer, though,
Yeah.
isn't it?
But you could stack a few 2 mils together, I
Yeah.
guess. But it depends how much thread you've got left on your pedal axle as well. But yeah, I think you have to also be a bit cautious. That if you look on Amazon, there's like loads of different like pedal spacer options, and generally speaking, again, like the more you pay, the better it is. But you do have to be a little bit careful, especially when buying kind of unbranded names and so on, because there's a lot of force going through your pedal, and I have seen pedal axles kind of break and snap. So
thread,
yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful when choosing your kind of extender axles. So yeah, see if you can go for like a branded one if possible.
Yeah. But then I think the other more interesting thing that we probably want to talk about is extender plates and spacers.
Yeah.
Because obviously, spacing of the bottom bracket, the crank, to allow for different lengths of axles, that's something that you're probably not going to be able to affect.
Yeah.
Unless you buy a new bike, obviously. But extender plates, spacers are now coming out with more range of adjustment other than fore aft.
Yeah.
So you can do medial lateral adjustment as well as fore aft as well, which is quite exciting from our point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last podcast we talked about extender plates that will allow you to move the cleat forward and back, or more forward and back than you would normally do. But if you have a look at the Form bike fitting kind of extender plates, they are offered with also side to side or medial lateral adjustment, as well as kind of forward and back adjustment. So again, this is a really cost effective way of achieving more adjustment within your current shoes and without having to change pedals and all the rest of it. So it does offer like just more options, which is great from a bike.
Yeah. Shout out to
Point of
Ronan
view.
for thinking it through
Yeah.
and making a wicked product.
Yeah. So they are really well thought through and very strong as well, because essentially you're just interfacing with the shoe itself. So yeah, if you do want more kind of either kind of movement side to side, that could be kind of moving towards the bike. Say for like slight riders and smaller riders who have narrow hips, then you might want to bring your shoes and feet closer to the bike. Then you can use those extender plates. But they also work in the opposite way. So if you've got wider hips or you're a bigger rider, then you might want to space your feet outwards a little bit more. So I think those are probably the main kind of methods for achieving different stance widths.
Certainly the ones that you're going to have a chance of playing with
Yeah.
without too much in the way of paraphernalia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So have a go with like kind of just the cleat adjustments first. Actually, maybe then if you still feel like you need some more, maybe the extender plates would be a better option again. And then if you need some finer adjustments or lots of adjustments, then pedal axles, or then going and buying some different pedals as well. Or maybe even some bike fitters I know will have a bunch of different pedals in stock, which you can kind of play around with and test out different pedal axles. So the main thing is, go test them out, see what happens. Should we talk a little bit more about...
Let's say applications and use cases. So why you might want a wider or a narrower stance.
You know what? The place where I noticed this most recently is actually watching my 6-year-old daughter riding around on her bike, and of course she's 6. She's like tiny. She's like really narrow. But even on kids' bikes, because we're limited by bottom bracket standards and so on, even the stance width on that bike is ridiculous compared. Like she's got 100mm cranks on there. Yeah. But the stance width is almost
That'll still be a 68mm shell, won't it?
Yeah, still a 68mm, and it looks ridiculous. Her feet are like kind of way outside of her kind of knee and hip range. Even though she's on flat pedals and playing around with that, but because they're kids, they're super flexible, they can kind of get away with it. Yeah. But you can really see this awkward kind of pedaling because knees are caving in and feet are way too wide. So kudos to kids out there.
But that's interesting though, because obviously your range of hip internal, external rotation, the actual location of where the ball and sockets are relative to your knees and your feet can play a massive part in why you might want to select a certain stance width. Yeah. So wider doesn't necessarily mean more stable.
No. It's it's always individual.
Exactly.
But just have a think about your anatomy and kind of how that interfaces with a bike. So larger riders will generally have talking very general terms, may have a wider hip and therefore require a wider stance, and slighter, smaller riders will have narrow hips and maybe need a narrower stance. But most riders can ride a range, again, as always. I ride a mountain bike, I ride a road bike and a time trial bike, and they all have different foot stances on them, and they all feel good for different.
Well, you were moaning about the cranks on your time trial bike being wider, weren't you?
Yeah, that's true.
You're like, but to slam my cleats, so I'm in a narrow stance because I ride my time trial bike.
Yeah, and so
so you can notice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they're choices that I've made to be able to kind of ride in a certain way. And of course, why not? Let's talk about aerodynamics. And,
do we have to?
Yeah. Well, the trend is to make everything narrow, and
so the theory being that narrower Q factor on your cranks reduces your frontal area, so makes you more aero. Yeah. But again, if you can't produce power in that position, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Really. So. Yeah. But it's an interesting take, I would say. So, there's certain more aerodynamically focused brands that are now making cranks that do have a narrower Q factor on a regular kind of,
Yeah. Bike.
time trial bike, road
Yeah,
bike, whatever, with a regular kind of bottom bracket shell to bring the stance width in, to narrow the frontal area of that rider. So people are taking it to quite extremes, but again, does this hamper your function as a rider? So do you have the hip internal rotation to be able to deal with this and still produce force and create stability on the bike? And what's the cost benefit analysis?
Yeah, as always, what do you want to optimize, aerodynamics or biomechanics, comfort, which one is it?
So there's a hierarchy, as long-term listeners of us ranting will know, but if you got the cash, it's interesting to experiment with.
Yeah.
But there's probably other things to do before that.
Yeah. I mean, what tests well in the wind tunnel, as always, isn't always the best for a real world.
Or even the
application.
velodrome. Yeah. Like, the velodrome's way different to outside.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
It's all these things to kind of consider.
Yeah. And I think lastly, somewhere where people need to kind of look is also their shoes.
Yeah.
Different shoes will kind of affect how or where your cleat is placed, but also how your feet kind of sit. So let's talk about cleat positioning first, because that's easy. So where the holes are drilled in your shoe, maybe on certain models like slightly wider or slightly narrower or inwards, and so that can have an effect on where you can place your kind of cleats.
Yeah, so here's a question, right? So we have very different shaped feet, right?
Yeah.
But as a consequence, we ride very different shoes.
Yeah.
Like, I never have an issue with things like holes being drilled in the shoes that I buy, because I buy pretty regular shaped shoes, because my feet are basically bang average in terms of width. I'm a D width.
Yeah.
But what I'd be interested to know, so you've ridden Lake 201s and 238 wides for a long time, right? And then you got your fancy pants 3D printed law shoes, which are like epic. They look so cool. But have you found that because they're 3D printed to the shape of, so you've got quite a wide foot shape.
Yeah.
So have you found that the cleat holes are drilled in a certain way relative to the last of that shoe, the shape of that shoe, that have either caused you problems with stance width, i.e. clattering the crank, or has that been kind of thought about, and is that an issue for people who need wider shoe lasts?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So my shoes were definitely they were still prototypes.
Yeah.
You know what though? Initially, I thought that they were, so one of the initial bits of feedback were like, these shoes are like too wide, in that, when I was clipped in, if I put the cleats in the same position as a regular shoe, then the inside edge of the 3D printed shoe would clatter the crank arm. And it was just a little bit, but it was more because I was kind of rotating my heel inwards quite a bit. But what I hadn't kind of figured out was that because the 3D printed shoe was actually just making my foot work in a different way, I actually had to lower my seat 3 mil, and then that actually let my foot kind of sit more naturally. And actually there's just enough clearance. And I think some of that extra kind of width on the shoe is actually through the unique kind of ankle joint. So the law shoes are kind of built up high around the ankle, and obviously your ankle bone kind of sticks out a little bit more, and so the shoe actually kind of molds around that a little bit, so it creates more of a...
Think of an Air Jordan high top and you're on the right lines,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. So there is more shoe to like kind of interface with the crank.
But that's interesting, right? So wider shoe, or for argument's sake, I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
If you go really wide on your stance width, that would affect the distance that you're covering from the saddle to the bottom of the pedal stroke.
Yes.
So you might actually need to lower your saddle height a little bit the wider you go to compensate and make sure that effective distance is the same.
It is. Just like if you go from a wide handlebar to a narrow handlebar,
Change the effective reach.
it changes the effective reach. So if you go narrow handlebar, you might actually need a slightly longer stem to kind of feel the same effective reach.
Or a slightly longer reach bar.
Yeah. So this is where like the body puts automatic compensation in. So if you're sitting a little bit too high, then your foot will kind of dip a little bit to see if they can make up that extra room. But different bodies will react in different ways. So if your saddle height's a little bit too low, you might find that you kind of rotate the heel in a little bit as your foot's kind of heeling down and trying to find the extra distance that it needs. If it can't find it vertically, then it will try and find it sometimes rotationally immediately. So yeah, there's lots of different.
But this is why it's
nuance.
important what we said at the beginning is that before you start playing with all this stuff, making sure that the rest of your position, the big kind of elements like your saddle height, your fore aft, your front end, your cleat fore aft is in a good place relative to everything else before you start digging into this sort of stuff.
And if you haven't listened to the series already, we did a whole podcast series on the 10 pillars of bike fit as the 10 steps in order to kind of figure out your bike fit and which elements to test in which order. So if you haven't listened to that, go listen to that. And then I guess this is like a little add-on or kind of further kind of mini series in order to kind of fine-tune kind of little things. So hopefully there's quite a lot of information there actually. Hopefully that was useful. So let us know how you go. If you're playing around with Q factor and stance width, let us know what you're feeling. And if you've got any questions, you know where to reach us.
And before you change anything, record it.
Yeah, absolutely. Record, test, go back, retest. All right.
On to the next one.
Thanks, guys. Ta-ra!
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Way or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.